General Hospital spoilers reveal that the hospital corridors had returned to their usual quiet hum. But Lucas couldn't unhear the silence that had fallen over General Hospital the night of the power outage, the exact moment that had changed everything. At first, the event had seemed like an unfortunate coincidence, a rare but not impossible system failure that had left parts of the hospital in darkness for just under 20 minutes. But now, with each passing day and each new layer of discovery, that event was transforming into something far more ominous, something no one could ignore anymore. And for Lucas, the most disturbing realization of all was not the blackout itself, but the horrifying possibility that Willow had caused it. It began with a simple question that wouldn't leave his mind. How had Daisy, still wearing her hospital-issued bracelet and logged as secure in the nursery, ended up in Sasha's arms while Sasha's real baby was temporarily missing? There were too many protocols in place, too many systems designed specifically to prevent these types of errors. Infants wore electronic ankle bracelets, crib IDs matched mother and child, and cameras tracked every entry and exit. There were redundancies on top of redundancies. And yet, the entire system had failed, conveniently, in the precise window that allowed a child to be misplaced. Lucas initially pushed the thought aside. Human error, tech failure, maybe even a malfunction in the system's central server, these were plausible, rational explanations. But the deeper he looked, the more the data resisted that narrative. The blackout hadn't originated from the main generator or a mechanical fault, it had been a software override. A command executed remotely from a portable workstation. And when the IT team traced the login credentials used to initiate the command, the name that appeared sent a chill down Lucas' spine, Willow. He reviewed the logs again and again, hoping for a mistake, some sign that her badge had been cloned, that someone else had used her terminal, that there was an innocent explanation. But everything pointed back to her: timestamps, access location, the fact that she had been present in the hospital shortly before the systems shut down. And most damning of all, it had happened just minutes after Lucas had spoken with her in the hallway outside the nursery, where she had seemed off, tired, disoriented, detached. She had claimed it was stress. That she was just overwhelmed by being allowed to see the children again. At the time, he'd believed her. Now, that moment haunted him. The implications were terrifying. If Willow had intentionally caused the blackout, then the baby mix-up wasn't an accident. It was a cover, a diversion she orchestrated to create a moment of access, to move undetected into the nursery. To place one baby where another should have been. And the question that loomed largest, the one Lucas couldn't stop asking himself, was why? Was Willow trying to take Daisy? Was she attempting to reclaim something she'd lost, Amelia, Wiley, the identity of motherhood that had been taken from her in court? Was this a calculated act of desperation? Or a symptom of something much darker, a psychological collapse that was now threatening the lives of others? The more Lucas contemplated it, the more disturbed he became. Because if Willow had done this, if she had manipulated hospital systems and crossed into criminal behavior, then she wasn't just struggling, she was unraveling. The guilt he felt for not recognizing the signs earlier, for not questioning her erratic state, was almost unbearable. But now he had a responsibility. The evidence was in his hands. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to go straight to the authorities, not yet. A part of him still wanted to believe that there was another explanation, a less horrifying one. But with each passing hour, that hope grew smaller and smaller. He started watching her more closely. He noticed how she lingered near the pediatric wing, how her eyes tracked babies being wheeled down the hallway. How she sometimes spoke to herself in whispers too low to make out. She had become more withdrawn, and when he tried to engage her in casual conversation, she seemed evasive, present in body, but distant in mind. It was like watching someone drift away in slow motion. And then came the most chilling moment yet. Lucas was reviewing nursery footage from earlier in the day. A routine check as part of the blackout investigation, when he saw Willow pause at the window outside the infant wing. She stared for over 7 minutes, unmoving, her face blank. She reached into her bag, pulled out something, an ID badge, and pressed it against the reader, though she didn't go in. Just tested it. And then she left. Lucas realized this wasn't over. That moment wasn't a lapse in memory or an emotional hiccup. It was a test. A rehearsal. And if she had gone that far once, she could do it again. The pressure weighed on him like a vice. If he acted too soon, he risked alienating her and potentially causing her to spiral even faster. But if he waited too long, a child could disappear. Again. Maybe permanently. He shared part of his findings with Felicia, careful not to jump to conclusions, but enough to start a formal internal investigation. Felicia's face grew pale as he laid out the sequence. Willow's login credentials, the exact timing of the blackout, her behavior before and after. She agreed that something wasn't right. And now the two of them were operating under a terrifying assumption, that Willow, once a symbol of quiet resilience, was now at the center of a potentially premeditated abduction plot masked as a system failure. This wasn't just a psychological episode. It was something calculated, hidden beneath layers of trauma and grief. And Lucas, caught between his duty to protect the hospital and his desire to help someone he once saw as a devoted mother, felt crushed beneath the weight of the truth. If this was real, if Willow had truly cut the power to switch babies, then she wasn't just unwell. She was dangerous. And the next time she acted, there might not be a mistake to reverse. Now, Lucas faces a choice. Stay silent and hope Willow gets help before someone gets hurt, or sound the alarm and risk breaking whatever pieces of her remain. But the time for hesitating is almost over. Because the shadows around Willow are growing, and the next power outage, literal or emotional, might be far more permanent. Willow had been living with the secret for far longer than anyone imagined. Beneath her fragile exterior and quiet grief, behind the haunted eyes that once begged for justice in a courtroom and the tired smile she forced in front of nurses and lawyers, there was something far darker taking root: rage. Because Willow had known for months, long before the custody trial collapsed, long before she lost everything in front of a cold judge and a room full of carefully curated lies, that Daisy wasn't just any child. Daisy was Michael's daughter. And that truth had shattered something deep within her, something she could no longer hold back. The revelation came by accident. A quietly misplaced medical file, a series of genetic markers flagged for pediatric compatibility. At first, Willow had denied it. She told herself it was just a coincidence. But the deeper she looked, quietly, methodically, obsessively, the more undeniable it became. Michael had fathered a child with Sasha, and no one had told her. Not even him. And while the world pitted Sasha as a survivor of grief and addiction, Willow saw something else. A thief. A liar. A woman who had taken what Willow believed was meant to be hers, not just motherhood. Not just a family, but Michael's loyalty. She watched from a distance as Michael grew closer to Sasha again. The co-parenting exchanges, the kind gestures. The way he began to speak of Sasha in softer tones, all while Willow was being phased out, controlled, monitored. And each time she looked into Daisy's eyes, so much like Michael's, it stoked the fire of betrayal in her until it consumed everything else. That was the moment Willow's grief twisted into something new. It stopped being about survival. It became about vengeance. Willow began to plan. Not with overt malice, but with clinical precision. She began volunteering near the infant care ward again, rebuilding her presence at the hospital. She played the role of a recovering woman, stable, composed, trustworthy. She smiled at Sasha in passing. She offered to help when Sasha looked tired. She even held Daisy on occasion, carefully masking the tremble in her fingers as she stared into the face of the child that should have been hers. The nurses admired her strength. The doctors praised her recovery. No one saw the fracture lines growing behind her smile. But Lucas began to suspect something was off. The timing of Willow's reappearance, her interest in Daisy, her odd behavior during quiet hours, all of it unsettled him. He remembered the power outage, the baby switch, the way Willow had looked at the children afterward, empty, unfocused. He hadn't spoken to anyone about his growing fears, but they lingered, quietly mounting pressure as Willow's presence became more pronounced. Meanwhile, Willow's obsession deepened. She wasn't content with Michael knowing the truth. No, that would be too simple. He had chosen Sasha, defended her, protected her. And so, in Willow's mind, they would both have to pay. Sasha would lose what she loved most, her daughter. And Michael, he would finally feel the full weight of what it meant to be betrayed by the person he trusted. Just as Willow had felt. The plan began in silence. Willow created fake appointment requests through the hospital scheduling system, nothing that triggered alarms, just enough to move Daisy's pediatric checkups. She intercepted Sasha's notifications, tampered with digital records. The goal was simple, get Daisy alone. And on a rainy Wednesday morning, she came close. Sasha had left the room briefly to take a phone call. Daisy was asleep. Willow approached the crib, reached in, lifted the child slowly into her arms. No alarms. No interruptions. Just her and the child she believed had been stolen. But something unexpected happened. Daisy stirred and looked up. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. And something in Willow cracked. She hadn't expected to feel the surge of guilt, the echo of her former self screaming beneath the hatred. She hesitated. Just long enough for a nurse to re-enter the room and smile. "You're a natural," the nurse said. "One day, you'll have your own again." Willow forced a smile, said nothing, and gently placed Daisy back down. But it wasn't over. That night, she broke into Sasha's apartment. It wasn't a violent act. There was no broken glass, no struggle. Willow knew the layout, had studied Sasha's schedule. She simply entered, stood in Daisy's nursery, and stared. The room was warm. Peaceful. Photos of Sasha and Michael smiled from picture frames. Willow's eyes locked on one in particular, Michael holding Daisy in the hospital. The image that confirmed everything. She took it. Placed it in her bag, and walked out. But now the walls are beginning to close in. Sasha has started to sense something is wrong. She finds objects misplaced, schedules changed. And Daisy restless at night. Lucas finally comes forward with his suspicions about Willow's access during the blackout. And Michael, torn between denial and dread, begins to review surveillance footage from the hospital's pediatric wing. What they find may be too late. Because Willow isn't just grieving anymore. She's transforming. Her heartbreak has metastasized into something unrecognizable. The woman who once stood for compassion is now crafting chaos in quiet, calculated strokes. And as the final phase of her plan looms, Port Charles may soon face a crisis far darker than a custody battle. This is no longer about family. It's about destruction. And if no one stops her, Willow may deliver a blow to Sasha that no one sees coming, one that could change the Corinthos family forever. Lucas had seen enough. The pieces had finally aligned into a picture too dark to deny. Too dangerous to ignore. The erratic behavior, the disturbing presence in the nursery, the doctored files, the inexplicable surveillance gaps, all of it pointed in one damning direction. Willow wasn't just unwell. She was unraveling into something unrecognizable. And now, as he stood in Sasha's apartment reviewing the last security footage showing Willow exiting with a photo of Michael and Daisy, Lucas knew the time for hesitation had passed. A line had been crossed. And if someone didn't act now, another line, far more permanent, would be crossed next. It had started as concern. Now it had become protection. Lucas swore to himself that no matter what fallout followed, he would do whatever it took to shield Sasha and Daisy from the storm Willow had become. He immediately contacted hospital security. Then the police. With Felicia's help, the incident reports were compiled. Access logs. Footage of Willow hovering too long near the infant ward. false medical appointment entries tied to her credentials. The missing hospital photograph, now recovered from Willow's belongings after a quiet but swift investigation. It was all there, enough not just for concern, but for arrest. Enough to classify what she had done as criminal, attempted abduction, medical sabotage, unlawful access to secured areas, and endangering a minor. And so, the unthinkable happened. In a quiet corner of the hospital where Willow had once worked with grace and gentleness, she was approached by law enforcement. Her face was blank, her hands trembling slightly as the officers read the charges. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She simply lowered her head and allowed herself to be escorted out. The whispers of staff and patients following her like shadows. For poor Charles, it was a moment of collective disbelief. Willow, once seen as a beacon of compassion and quiet strength, was now the centerpiece of a spiraling criminal case. And as the news broke, former nurse arrested in hospital baby sabotage, the town stood stunned. What began as whispers about her mental health had now turned into full-blown headlines. The community that once pitted her now feared her. But the chaos didn't end with the arrest. In fact, that was only the beginning. Sasha, holding Daisy closer than ever, struggled with the overwhelming realization that someone she once trusted had nearly destroyed everything she loved. She remembered the strange looks, the brief moments when Willow had held Daisy and smiled just a second too long. Now those memories burned with a different weight, warnings she hadn't recognized. Michael, paralyzed by guilt, was forced to reckon with his own failures. He had protected Drew, ignored signs, distanced himself from Willow when she needed help. And now someone he once loved was behind bars for trying to harm his child. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a collapse of every foundation he had built in the last year. Lucas became the unexpected center of calm in the storm. As the one who had pulled the trigger to involve authorities, he faced scrutiny but stood unwavering. He moved Sasha and Daisy to a private, undisclosed location until the legal process could fully play out. He worked closely with the district attorney's office, sharing every detail, every document. Every moment he had doubted but stayed silent. And with every testimony, he strengthened the case against Willow, but also began to push for a psychological evaluation. Because as much as the town wanted justice, Lucas understood that what they were dealing with might be bigger than vengeance. This was the portrait of a mind imploding under grief, betrayal, and untreated trauma. Still, the charges stood. And the courtroom loomed. Willow now faced months of legal scrutiny. The judge ordered her held without bail pending a full psychiatric assessment. Her once bright future dimmed under the weight of felony indictments. Her name, once spoken with sympathy, became synonymous with instability and danger. Poor Charles was changed. The Corinthos family was shaken. And yet, as Sasha held her daughter beneath the quiet hum of a safe house, as Lucas stood watch outside with determined eyes, one thing was absolutely clear: Daisy was safe. The threat had been identified, confronted, and contained. But even as calm began to return, the trauma lingered. Because the real horror wasn't just what Willow had done. It was how close she had come to getting away with it. And in a town built on secrets and survival. The memory of how quickly a trusted soul could become a threat would not be forgotten anytime soon. The final chapter of Willow's tragic descent has arrived, and with it, the painful confirmation of her undoing. What began as a slow unraveling of grief and betrayal has now collapsed into an irreversible, heartbreaking end. The woman once known for her quiet resilience and unwavering devotion to her children has become the center of a town-wide reckoning, her name now whispered not with sympathy, but with fear. And the consequences of her fall are rippling far beyond her jail cell, dragging both Drew and Michael into a new vortex of emotional chaos, legal scrutiny, and psychological devastation that no one in Port Charles could have foreseen. Willow's mental breakdown had been festering in the shadows for months. But it wasn't until the police led her out of General Hospital in handcuffs that the magnitude of her actions became undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming: tampered medical files, falsified appointments, surveillance footage of her unauthorized access to the nursery, and the confirmed link between her login and the orchestrated blackout that enabled the temporary baby switch. Her obsession with Daisy, now revealed to stem from a hidden knowledge of Michael's paternity, painted the full picture. Willow had spiraled so far into grief and isolation that she saw herself as the rightful mother of a child who was never hers. The court proceedings moved quickly, with a psychiatric evaluation determining that Willow was unfit to stand trial in the traditional sense. She was instead committed to a long-term psychiatric facility under maximum security supervision, where her treatment would begin, but with no promise of recovery. She had slipped into a state of detachment from reality, no longer able to distinguish her memories of Amelia from her fixation on Daisy. Her final moments in the courtroom were haunting. When asked if she had anything to say, she simply looked at Michael, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "She was mine too." The weight of those words crushed Michael. He had spent months compartmentalizing the damage around him, blaming Drew for manipulating the custody system, blaming Sasha for her return into their lives, blaming himself for being unable to save Willow from the unraveling he now knew had started long before anyone noticed. But as Willow was taken away, Michael felt something darker settle in his chest. Regret. Regret that he hadn't fought harder for her. Regret that he hadn't seen what was coming. And now, that regret is threatening to dismantle him from the inside out. Meanwhile, Drew's role in the destruction is no longer ignorable. His manipulation of hospital systems during the custody trial, his calculated use of Willow's pain for public sympathy, and his relentless push to maintain control over her life even as she deteriorated, all of it has resurfaced under renewed scrutiny. Investigators have reopened parts of the custody case, and whispers are growing louder that Drew may have contributed to Willow's collapse through coercion, isolation, and emotional exploitation. The wedding announcement, once viewed as a romantic gesture, is now seen as a disturbing power move. Public support is evaporating. His leadership at ELQ is in jeopardy. And the very foundation of his identity, the image of the reformed hero, is crumbling beneath the truth of what he allowed to happen. Drew and Michael are now caught in a spiraling crisis neither of them can control. Drew faces legal challenges and potential civil suits for abuse of power and manipulation of a mentally vulnerable woman. Michael, emotionally shattered, is losing grip on his moral compass, questioning every decision he made, from distancing himself to trusting Drew in the first place. The Corinthos family is divided once again, old wounds reopened, alliances shattered. Carly refuses to speak to Drew. Monica is devastated by what her adopted son has become. Jason, who tried to remain distant, now finds himself the only one capable of holding Michael together as he teeters on the edge of guilt and rage. And through it all, Daisy remains the center of this storm, unaware of the destruction left in her name. Sasha holds her tighter than ever, haunted by the thought that someone she once considered a friend nearly stole her child. She visits Willow's facility once, hoping for closure, but leaves more shaken than before. She wasn't the enemy, Sasha confides in Lucas later. She was a victim too. But no one saved her. Not in time. This is the end of Willow's story, a quiet, broken conclusion to a once bright soul whose pain was never fully seen until it became uncontainable. Her name now echoes through Port Charles not as a cautionary tale, but as a tragic reminder of what happens when silence replaces support, when pain is weaponized, and when the people closest choose control over compassion. And as Drew and Michael sit in the ruins of everything they tried to manipulate and protect, one thing is devastatingly clear: Willow's fall was not just her own. It has become theirs too. And no amount of redemption may ever be enough to clean the blood from their hands.